Hi, Father Anderson here. Another video in our ongoing series. I thought I would speak to you today about life in foreign lands. I think we all are interested in foreign places, and especially you who are viewing this, no doubt, are for the most part from the United States, and would be interested in how the apostolate of the Society of St. Pius X works in other places, other countries, how it's similar and how it's different from here. So I want to speak to you about some experiences of mine. Two stories, really. Not randomly. In fact, they come from a video report that I watched last week. Believe it or not, from about the construction of a new capital city for Indonesia on the island of Borneo. I'm not sure if you've heard of that. Last year, the government of Indonesia decided to build a new capital city in Borneo because the present capital, Jakarta, is sinking. And this reminded me of some of my experiences from about 10 years ago. So I thought I'd speak to you about two of them. The first is not really related to Borneo. That is, so Borneo itself is an immense island that's under the administration of three different countries, one of which is Malaysia. And I was doing my weekend circuit, typical weekend circuit, stationed in Singapore to Malaysia, Peninsular Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, the suburb. That was our chapel there, rather small, but every weekend. And one of the ladies there at our chapel had some sort of knowledge of, some sort of connection with a leprosarium in the capital city, so a hospital for lepers, and some sort of connection with the parish church there. And she suggested that we do something for the Catholics in the leprosarium. So we decided to give it a go, see what would happen. And so the excellent people there, especially our coordinators, whose family name I won't give you because they'd probably be embarrassed if they heard it, decided that we would go one day, and we did. We showed up at the reception desk of the hospital and asked if we might visit the Catholics there. Now imagine what a hospital for lepers is in such a country. It's not what you perhaps typically think of as the hospital. It had the medical services, of course, but much more open, very mild climate. And it was not simply a hospital, it was a place that people lived, a place that people would spend their entire lives, in fact, more than a hospital. And it was very well known. It had connected with it a nursery, a plant nursery, gardens, and in the past the patients had run the thing themselves to, say, pay for their room and board. But as you might expect, over time, such operations become professionalized. And I believe it was the biggest plant nursery in Kuala Lumpur when I was there. And the patients really didn't work it anymore, but they had in the past. So it was quite well known. It was under the patronage of the king. So officially Muslim, and yet Catholics had no problem being received there. So we went, and imagine how it is in such a country. If you want to know who the Catholics are, you simply ask. And the officials typically know, and if they don't know, the nurses know. And then if you find one Catholic in the establishment, you find all of them. And we did. I don't remember the number really. I want to say, if I had to guess, 12. But it was very big, very large establishment. Men separated from the women, of course. And there were various buildings that would provide different levels of care, because some of the patients were in very good health, others were completely debilitated. So we managed to meet them all. We didn't know what we would do. First thing was first contact, and then seeing what would happen after that. So we did, and it wasn't so easy because if many people in Malaysia speak English, those who have been deprived of an education, especially because of their health, lepers, don't. So it wasn't very easy for me to communicate with them. And with them, who are they? Well, Catholics in such a country typically, not solely, but mainly Chinese or Indian in heritage. So, met them and tried to do something. And at that point, there certainly was no question of offering Mass at the hospital. In fact, we never got that far. And then what I do remember, my last visit was right before Christmas, perhaps the day before Christmas, which I believe fell on Sunday that year. I knew I would not be going back myself because I was awaiting an assignment in a different country. And we went around and offered some simple gifts to the Catholics there, bags of, holy images and perhaps candies and I don't know what else. And also, as I was reminded when I went through my photo archives and saw was reminded of what we did at that time. The people from our chapel went around with hymnals and singing Christmas caroling for the people at that time. So I went around and then started with the women and then went to see the men, whose names I remember, believe it or not. I don't remember any names really, normally. Yet I remember the names of the men there. And there's one we couldn't find. He was Simon. He had been there 50 years, spent his last 50 years there. Couldn't find him, and they told us eventually that he'd been transferred to a different unit because he was having problems and he was on the decline. We did eventually manage to find him, and he wasn't doing well. And it seemed that he perhaps needed extreme unction, and it was, in those circumstances, rather difficult to hear confession. But I learned from the staff, and perhaps from Simon himself, that he had been visited not long ago by a priest, diocesan priest. And I managed to call the parish there and to ask about that visit. Had the confession been heard? Had the man been given extreme unction? And I was told that the confession had been heard, but extreme unction had not been given. So happened, I had the Holy Oils on me at that point. I don't know why. Normally, I didn't. You don't just travel with them, but I did at that time. So I managed to give him extreme unction, knowing I would not see him again. What I remember especially from those times, from my visits, is an impression of serenity, of peace of soul, sort of thing one seldom sees in my Western world. Many of us would not be at peace in such an environment. And those there never expressed any of those sentiments that we do see here rather often: bitterness, anger, resentment, and all the rest. I never got a sense of any of that from the poor people there, and who had been there, in some cases, for 50 years. Second story does relate to Borneo. So, a different apostolate. If we went to Peninsular Malaysia every Sunday, we didn't go so often to Borneo. I believe it was once a month. And that part of Malaysia is, say, more Catholic than the peninsular part. And there was a large prison where we would go. And because a good number of the prisoners there were English-speaking and Catholic, one of our priests had, before my time, begun an apostolate, a visit to the prison. And it was a real prison. High fences, barbed wire, for murderers, that sort of thing. A real prison. And once again, say officially Muslim prison. And I was always shocked by the fact that there would be a guard who in uniform would walk by me and say, "Good morning, Father," in English, call me Father. It happened to work out quite well because of the travel schedule. Once again, it was an example of God's providence. Have Mass on Sunday and then Mass Monday morning, and priest would have a bite to eat and then would be able to take the Blessed Sacrament to the prison. So the way it would work is the parishioners would drive me there, and then they would go up to the desk and arrange everything, and you could see people waiting around, family members of prisoners, and there was ladies who would arrange everything, and eventually they would call out my name, and I would go in to a private room to meet with the prisoners. So it was prisoners behind bars, a rather big room that could receive a lot of prisoners, bars. But the extraordinary thing, which you may not find it easy to believe if you're from the Western world, is never once did anyone search my bags, frisk me, put me through a metal detector or anything like that. I walked in with loaded bags into a prison where I was free to pass on to the prisoners whatever I wanted. Surely there was a camera there, but anyway, I could have given them anything at all. And what I did have, one thing I had was matches to light candles for distribution of communion after I heard the confessions. So if there was a group of men, one would come into the room for confession and leave and come back, and eventually there was a catechism lesson afterwards. And in fact, one of the times, a warden, manifestly a Catholic man, he joined us for the catechism lesson. He didn't join us for confession, but for the catechism. And I remember him saying rather in an authoritarian manner to the prisoners when I was giving them something, rosaries, you be very careful, treat with respect that thing, you don't drop it on the ground. When the warden wasn't there, I could give them whatever I wanted, a book, anything. They simply had to turn over to the officials after the visit whatever they had received, so they could receive a stamp, an official stamp. Very different from prison life in our country. Don't know if you've ever had an experience with our prisons. You can't very easily even go in with the Blessed Sacrament for communion. Very, very different. That's how it is. In different places, God gives us what we need, and He certainly was giving those men what they needed. And perhaps, I don't know how it's going on now, that ministry could have been extended to a woman's prison not far away. Women were separated from the men, and we couldn't visit the women because of time. But perhaps in the future we can. In fact, this very circuit I'm speaking of was one done by our present Superior General before my time. Now that's how it is. God gives us what we need, and when we need it. And I think what is, for me, very interesting about such experiences is that our life in the Society of St. Pius X is the same around the world in very different circumstances. There are adaptations, and yet the structure works so very well. The priory life, the weekend missions, adaptations to circumstances, confession, sometimes through an interpreter and all the rest. And through it all, God provides for us.